So today I thought that I could make a video about something that we can pretty much always utilize as a way to directly embrace the moment better, and a way to, generally speaking, kind of work through our feelings and emotions to get to a more comfortable place. So often, especially when it comes to trying to improve ourselves with the idea of like improving our external reality, we hear about, all these very exotic sounding techniques and all these very interesting techniques, things like visualization and various journaling exercises, various affirmation exercises, all these different type of techniques to try to manifest something different in our outer world. However, if you are familiar with what we usually talk about on here, you probably know that I just don't think these techniques work for most people most of the time. Which is not to say that they're a fault of the technique. It's just that we each are, a different person, and what works for us is so subjective and based on our personal sensibility, our personal history. So as cool as these various quote unquote manifesting techniques might be, the truth of the matter is none of them tend to work as well as huge proponents of them say they will for everybody. You understand? It's much more about finding what works for you, as opposed to utilizing some hot or sexy technique, some really cool visualization or self-hypnotic or NLP exercise or whatever it may be. That stuff is great, but only up to a point. And what we will in all likelihood notice if we're into these ideas for long enough and have tried enough techniques is that even the techniques that do seemingly work for us some of the time often do not work for us as consistently as we would like. It's not like they, quote unquote, always work, right? For some people they do, but, to put a ballpark figure on it, I'd say 90% of people who are into these ideas can't just rely on a certain technique and expect it to work for them again and again and again. And I think actually the number's probably much higher than that percentage even. But we have to get away from this idea of there being like a magical technique. After all, and I'll put a video above, a link to a video I made about this. Even Neville, who, has some of the more fantastic techniques that, I've heard of, and I think a lot of you have probably heard of. And even if you love Neville, as amazing as his manifesting techniques are, he still is quoted as saying that, listen, all these techniques are just figurative. I'm just using them or showing them to you so you use them so I and you believe that they work, you believe you can have what you want. So I believe that I have what I want. It's figurative. It's not like it's not Sats that was doing it for Neville. It was that full-on belief that Sats engendered for Neville and for people who like those type of techniques. This is all a preamble, or an introduction, you could say, to what I'm about to talk about, which basically does always do something. But it's not a manifesting technique, at least not a direct manifesting technique where it's like I'm trying to change how I feel to then directly change or manipulate my external reality, right? It's more inward than that. And unlike a lot of these other techniques we hear about that might sometimes work for us, but a lot of times leave us befuddled because they don't always work or only work seldomly or only work for small things but don't work for big things. This approach I'm about to talk about pretty much will always do something. And it can lead to external manifestations, but the point is not the external manifestation. And this approach is simply to feel what comes up, to feel into your feelings, to feel into your emotions. Specifically, when people talk about this, feeling into your uncomfortable or difficult or quote-unquote negative emotions. Things like feeling into your fear or your shame or your anger. Feeling into those feelings that we usually don't want to go near because we're afraid if we go near them that they're gonna, somehow get worse. That we're gonna let the boogeyman out of the closet and our life is gonna go crazy because we're actually feeling our fear or feeling our shame. Well, of course, as most of you know watching this, the reality is if we feel into it, we then go to the closet to look at the boogeyman, and the boogeyman is not there. So we've spoken a lot about this in the past, and there's many different ways of feeling into your feelings, you could say, but the overall idea, the general idea is basically the same in the sense where if a feeling comes up and it's bothering you, you can feel into it. You can feel into it. David Hawkins explains this really well. He says, David Hawkins talks about a bunch of stuff, but like the main valuable thing he talks about and does so brilliantly is explain how you can feel into these feelings that bother us, and they will essentially dissipate. And that this often happens very quickly. It doesn't take hours always. It can take 5 minutes, and we can go from having like this real, feeling of fear to this feeling of contentment. I'm not saying it's always going to be that fast, but the point is it can be shocking what occurs when we allow ourselves to just feel a feeling and not associate a story with it or create a narrative around it. And this is something, like I said, that we can pretty much always do, If we, simply give ourselves the space and the depth to be with an uncomfortable feeling, we can feel into it. And by feeling into it, we relatively quickly often, but in the very least, even if it's not relatively quickly, in the very least, within a short period of time, meaning under, I would say, half an hour, we will have shifted something about how we look at that feeling. And that doesn't mean the feeling is gone forever, but it does mean that we are shifting how we look at that feeling. And with practice and cultivation, we can start looking at this, uncomfortable feeling that terrified us in a whole new way. And it becomes much less burdensome to do so. And I would argue for many of us, especially those of us who do not have a specific manifesting technique that works for them over and over again, I would argue that feeling into your feelings in the way I just described, in this very simple way. And again, if you want a very succinct summation, just read chapter 2 of David Hawkins' book, Letting Go. You don't have to read the whole book. It's an excellent book. But if you just want a short summation that really, hits the main points, check out chapter 2 of Letting Go. I think it's called The Mechanism of Letting Go. It explains the general a simple approach for how to do this in a very straightforward way. And we made many videos about this as well. I'll put a link above to one of the videos we've done about this. But I would say that this type of approach, which is ironically an approach to feel better and to manifest a better life, even though we're not explicitly trying to change anything on the external, I would say this is something you can rely on much more than any, specific visualization or affirmation or journaling technique. Now, again, that's for most people. There are going to be a small percentage of people watching this that like affirmations pretty much always work well for them, or visualizations always work well for them. But just truth be told, that's not most of you. It's not me for sure. No way. The only things that I can rely on really with consistency is sitting on my butt, as I talked about the other day in the group session. I'll put a link above to that as well. And something I talk about all the time. Sitting on my butt, vibing out in that way. Talking out loud to myself is something that's consistently effective for me. Not so much even for like, quote unquote, manifesting things, but just for like feeling better. It's a great stress reduction tool for me, as is moving around playfully, as I often discuss. In this, feeling into my feelings. I woke up the other night and there was like a lot of anxiety. I had like a nightmare, and then there was like a real feeling of tension, and I felt into it. And it was not gone in 5 minutes. But within, 20, 30 minutes, it was gone. It's something that we can rely on, most of us. Feeling into the feeling instead of denying it or freaking out about it even more. So it's very helpful. If you have any questions, you can let me know. I'm available for coaching and to provide guidance if I can be a help. I can be reached at radicalcounselor.com.